What is this thing called joy, and how is it possible that it can evoke such a wide range of feelings? How can the experience of joy span from those tears of joy at a birth to an irrepressible belly laugh at a joke, to a serenely contented smile during meditation? Joy seems to blanket this entire emotional expanse. Paul Ekman, famed emotions researcher and longtime friend of the Dalai Lama, has written that joy is associated with feelings as varied as pleasure of the five senses, amusement, from a chuckle to a belly laugh, contentment, a calmer kind of satisfaction, excitement, in response to novelty or challenge, relief, following upon another emotion such as fear, anxiety, and even pleasure, wonder, before something astonishing and admirable, ecstasy or bliss, transporting us outside ourselves, exultation at having accomplished a difficult or daring task, radiant pride when our children earn a special honor, unhealthy jubilation or schadenfreude, relishing in someone else's suffering, elevation from having witnessed an act of kindness, generosity, or compassion, gratitude, the appreciation of a selfless act of which one is the beneficiary. In his book on happiness, Buddhist scholar and former scientist Matthew Ricard has added 3 other more exalted states of joy. Rejoicing in someone else's happiness, what Buddhists call mudita, delight or enchantment, a shining kind of contentment, spiritual radiance, a serene joy born from a deep well-being and benevolence. This helpful mapping of the kingdom of joy conveys its complexity and its subtlety. Joy can span from the pleasure of others' good fortune, what Buddhists call mudita, to the pleasure in others' misfortune, what the Germans call schadenfreude. Clearly, what the Archbishop was describing was more than mere pleasure and closer to the relief, wonder, and ecstasy of birth. Joy certainly does embrace all of these human experiences, but lasting joy, joy as a way of being, that one witnesses in the Archbishop and the Dalai Lama is probably closest to the shining contentment, or the spiritual radiance born from deep well-being and benevolence. I knew this complex topography of joy was what we were here to discover. Research conducted at the Institute of Neuroscience and Psychology at the University of Glasgow suggests that there are really only 4 fundamental emotions, 3 of which are so-called negative emotions: fear, anger, and sadness. The only positive one is joy or happiness. Exploring joy is nothing less than exploring what makes human experience satisfying. Is joy a feeling that comes and surprises us, or is it a more dependable way of being? I asked. For the 2 of you, joy seems to be something much more enduring. Your spiritual practice hasn't made you somber and serious. It's made you more joyful. So how can people cultivate that sense of joy as a way of being and not just a temporary feeling? The Archbishop and the Dalai Lama looked at each other, and the Archbishop gestured to the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama squeezed the Archbishop's hand and began. Yes, it is true. Joy is something different from happiness. When I use the word happiness, in a sense I mean satisfaction. Sometimes we have a painful experience, but that experience, as you've said with birth, can bring great satisfaction and joyfulness. Let me ask you, the Archbishop jumped in. You've been in exile 50 what years? 56. 56 years from a country that you love more than anything else. Why are you not morose? Morose, the Dalai Lama asked, not understanding the word. As Shinpa hurried to translate morose into Tibetan, the Archbishop clarified. Sad. The Dalai Lama took the Archbishop's hand in his, as if comforting him while reviewing these painful events. The Dalai Lama's story discovery as the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama meant that at the age of 2, he was swept away from his rural home in the Amdo province of eastern Tibet to the 1,000-room Potala Palace in the capital city of Lhasa. There he was raised in opulent isolation as the future spiritual and political leader of Tibet, and as a godlike incarnation of the Bodhisattva of compassion. After the Chinese invasion of Tibet in 1950, the Dalai Lama was thrust into politics. At the age of 15, he found himself the ruler of 6 million people and facing an all-out and desperately unequal war. For 9 years, he tried to negotiate with Communist China for his people's welfare and sought political solutions as the country came to be annexed. In 1959, during an uprising that risked resulting in a massacre, the Dalai Lama decided with a heavy heart to go into exile. The odds of successfully escaping India were frighteningly small, but to avoid a confrontation and a bloodbath, he left in the night dressed as a palace guard. He had to take off his recognizable glasses, and his blurred vision must have heightened his sense of fear and uncertainty as the escape party snuck by garrisons of the People's Liberation Army. They endured sandstorms and snowstorms as they were summited 19,000-foot mountain peaks during their 3-week escape. One of my practices comes from an ancient Indian teacher. The Dalai Lama began answering the Archbishop's question. He taught that when you experience some tragic situation, think about it. If there's no way to overcome the tragedy, then there is no use worrying too much. So I practiced that. The Dalai Lama was referring to the 8th century Buddhist master Shantideva, who wrote, "If something can be done about the situation, what need is there for dejection? And if nothing can be done about it, what use is there for being dejected?" The Archbishop cackled, perhaps because it seemed almost too incredible that someone could stop worrying just because it was pointless. "Yes, but I think people know it with their head." He touched both index fingers to his scalp. "You know, that it doesn't help worrying, but they still worry." "Many of us have become refugees," the Dalai Lama tried to explain. "And there are a lot of difficulties in my own country. When I look only at that," he said, cupping his hands into a small circle, "then I worry." He widened his hands, breaking the circle open. "But when I look at the world, there are a lot of problems, even within the People's Republic of China. For example, the Hui Muslim community in China has a lot of problems and suffering. And then outside China, there are many more problems and more suffering. When we see these things, we realize that not only do we suffer, but so do many of our human brothers and sisters. So when we look at the same event from a wider perspective, we will reduce the worrying and our own suffering." I was struck by the simplicity and profundity of what the Dalai Lama was saying. This was far from "don't worry, be happy," as the popular Bobby McFerrin song says. This was not a denial of pain and suffering, but a shift in perspective, from oneself and towards others, from anguish to compassion, seeing that others are suffering as well. The remarkable thing about what the Dalai Lama was describing is that as we recognize others' suffering and realize that we are not alone, our pain is lessened.